The smartest man in the universe once saved the world by killing millions and calling it mercy. Then he arrived in Warhammer 40K and discovered the Imperium had already perfected his philosophy on a galactic scale. But when Ozymandias realizes the emperor of mankind's brutal regime is mathematically doomed to fail, can the man who always has a solution engineer salvation for humanity? Or will he finally encounter the one problem even his genius cannot solve? The air tasted wrong. That was Adrian Veidt's first observation upon materializing in an alley between two massive towers of rust-streaked metal. Not poisoned exactly, but processed through so many filters and scrubbers that it had lost any connection to nature. He pressed two fingers to his neck, checking his pulse, elevated but stable. His perfect physique had survived whatever phenomenon brought him here. Around him, the alley was narrow, barely 6 feet across. The walls rose hundreds of stories overhead, blocking out the sky. Somewhere far above, he heard the grinding of machinery, constant and rhythmic like a mechanical heartbeat. Below his feet, the ground was not earth or concrete, but corrugated metal plates bolted together, some panels newer than others, creating a patchwork floor that spoke of constant repair. Adrian moved to the alley's edge and looked out at the city beyond. His breath caught. Hive cities, his mind supplied, though he did not know how he possessed this knowledge. Towers stretched upward for miles, connected by bridges and transit tubes. Billions of people lived here, stacked atop one another in layers of habitation that blocked out natural light for all but the highest levels. The scale dwarfed anything from his world. New York's skyline was a child's toy compared to this. He stepped into the main thoroughfare. Thousands of people shuffled past, their clothing uniform in its dreariness. Gray robes, brown work coveralls, faces covered in grime. No one looked at anyone else. No one spoke unless necessary. The crowd moved with the exhausted efficiency of people who had forgotten any other way to live. Adrian's own clothing, his gold and purple costume, should have drawn attention. Yet no one glanced his way. He observed this with interest. Either they had learned not to notice anomalies, or their lives were so filled with hardship that a strangely dressed man barely registered as noteworthy. A scream cut through the mechanical grinding. The crowd's reaction was immediate and telling. They did not run toward the sound to help. They did not run away in panic. They simply moved aside, creating a clear path, then returned to their shuffling progress once the danger zone was established. Adrian moved toward the scream. 3 blocks away, he found the source. A crowd had gathered in a circular plaza, but they stood at a safe distance, watching. In the center, creatures that resembled humans but were clearly not attacked a group of security forces. The creatures had extra arms erupting from their torsos. Their heads were elongated, skull-like. Purple and blue skin stretched over too much muscle. The security forces wore armor that looked crude but functional. They carried weapons that fired explosive projectiles. Each shot that connected with a creature blew fist-sized holes through flesh. Yet the creatures kept coming, driven by something beyond pain or survival instinct. Adrian watched for exactly 90 seconds. In that time, he observed 17 separate tactical errors by the security forces. They bunched together, making themselves easier targets. They wasted ammunition on limb shots when headshots were clearly more effective. They had no coordinated fire pattern. Despite their numerical advantage, 8 security officers died in those 90 seconds. He could intervene. His physical capabilities far exceeded human norms. He had fought and defeated beings with superhuman strength before. These creatures, while dangerous, moved in predictable patterns. He calculated he could neutralize all 7 remaining hostiles in approximately 42 seconds with 0 friendly casualties. Instead, Adrian remained still and watched. This was not cruelty. This was data collection. How long would reinforcements take to arrive? What weapons proved most effective? How did the civilian population react to violence? What did the security forces prioritize when forced to choose between protecting civilians and protecting themselves? The answer to that last question came quickly. When one creature broke from the main group and charged toward the civilian crowd, not a single security officer moved to intercept it. They maintained their position, focusing fire on the main threat. The creature reached the crowd. People scattered, but not fast enough. It grabbed a woman, perhaps 30 years old, and its clawed hands began to tear. Adrian's jaw tightened, his muscles tensed, but he did not move, not yet. The creature dropped the woman's body and reached for a child, no more than 7 years old. The child's mother pushed him behind her, facing the creature with nothing but her bare hands and desperate courage. Adrian moved. He crossed the distance in 2 seconds faster than human eyes could track. His fist connected with the creature's skull with precisely calculated force. The bone shattered. The creature dropped instantly, dead before it hit the ground. The security forces had finally noticed the breakaway threat. They turned their weapons toward Adrian and the creature's corpse. He raised his hands slowly, showing he held no weapons, his face calm and unthreatening. "Stand down," one officer commanded, his voice amplified through his helmet speakers. "Identify yourself." "A traveler," Adrian replied simply. "I saw someone in danger and helped." The officer approached, weapon still raised. Up close, Adrian could see the wear on the armor, the patches and repairs. This equipment was old, maintained through necessity rather than replaced with newer models. He filed this observation away. "Where are you from?" the officer demanded. "What hive district? What work assignment?" "I'm not from this city," Adrian said truthfully. "I arrived today." The officer's weapon lowered slightly. Confusion entered his voice. "There are no arrivals scheduled for this district. All off-world transports must clear customs at the upper spire." "Nevertheless, I am here," Adrian replied. He gestured toward the main plaza where the security forces had finally killed the last creatures. "What were those things?" "That's classified information, citizen." The officer turned to his squad. "Take him to the precinct house. The magistrate will sort this out." Adrian allowed himself to be escorted. He did not resist when they placed restraints on his wrists, though he could have snapped them like paper. The precinct house was a fortress built into the base of a hab tower. Inside, hundreds of people waited in lines, each seeking permission for something, reporting something, requesting something. The bureaucracy was immediately apparent and familiar. He was processed with mechanical efficiency. Name, origin, purpose for travel. Each question met with partial truths. Adrian Veit, Earth, seeking knowledge. The clerk recording his information barely looked at him, her augmented eyes scanning forms that appeared on screens built into her skull. They placed him in a holding cell with 24 other people. Some slept on the floor. Others stared at nothing. One man in the corner muttered prayers to someone called the Emperor, begging for mercy and forgiveness for sins Adrian could not identify. Hours passed. Adrian used the time to observe and listen. From conversations around him, he began to piece together the structure of this society. The Emperor was not merely a political leader, but a religious figure, worshipped as a god. The creatures that attacked were called Genestealers, part of a cult that had infiltrated the hive's lower levels. The punishment for cult membership was death, not just for the cultist, but for their entire family line. The casual acceptance of collective punishment disturbed him more than the violence itself. These people considered it normal, even necessary. After 6 hours, a man in different clothing approached his cell. Not a uniform, but robes of office, dark red with golden trim. His face was old, perhaps 70, but his eyes were sharp and calculating. "Adrian Veit," the man said, reading from a data slate. "No record of birth, no work assignment, no residential permit. You should not exist according to our systems, yet here you are. And witnesses report you moved faster than human capability to kill a Genestealer hybrid with a single blow." "I did what anyone should do when they see someone in danger," Adrian replied. "Anyone would have died," the man corrected. "Yet you did not. This interests me. I am Governor Talus, administrator of this hive district. You will come with me." The cell door opened. Adrian followed the governor through corridors lined with security. They entered an elevator that rose for several minutes, climbing toward the upper levels. When the doors opened, the change was immediate. Clean air, natural light filtering through actual windows, plants growing in decorative planters. The divide between upper and lower classes was not subtle. The governor's office overlooked the hive city below. From this height, Adrian could see the true scale. Millions of people crammed into spaces never meant to hold so many. Smoke and steam rose from countless industrial processes. In the distance, he saw other hive cities, dozens of them, spreading across a landscape he could not fully observe. "Impressive, is it not?" the governor said. "This world supports 40 billion souls, all in service to the Emperor and the Imperium of man." 40 billion, Adrian repeated. The number was staggering. His entire Earth held 7 billion. "And those creatures? The Genestealers? A cult that has festered in our lower levels for 2 generations. They spread through infection and seduction, turning loyal citizens into monsters that worship the Xenos. We purge them when we find them, but they breed faster than we can kill. Within 5 years, they will outnumber loyal citizens in the lower hive. Within 10, they will overwhelm our defenses entirely. The governor spoke of this doom with the calm acceptance of someone describing the weather. "And what is your plan to prevent this?" Adrian asked. "Prevent?" The governor laughed, a bitter sound. "We cannot prevent it. We can only delay it. When the lower hive falls, we will seal it off and abandon those levels. The survivors will be compressed into smaller spaces. Billions will die, but the hive will survive." Adrian's mind raced through calculations. Population density, resource allocation, infection rates. That's not a solution. That's managed extinction. Each time you abandon a level, you increase density in remaining areas, which accelerates infection spread. You're creating a death spiral. "You see clearly," the governor said. "Most do not. They have faith that the Emperor will provide. I am cursed with enough intelligence to see our doom, but not enough power to prevent it. Which brings me to you, Adrian Veidt. You are clearly not from this world. Your clothing, your speech patterns, your physical capabilities, all mark you as something other. So I will ask you directly. Are you a threat to this hive?" Adrian considered his answer carefully. "I am not your enemy. I came here seeking to understand this place. What I've seen troubles me deeply." "Then you have wisdom," the governor replied. "This universe should trouble anyone with sense. We live in darkness, waiting for the light to fail completely. And yet we persist because the alternative is to surrender to horrors that would make the Genestealers seem merciful." The governor turned from the window and fixed Adrian with a penetrating stare. "I am going to do something very dangerous. I'm going to give you access to our archives and see what you do with the information. If you are a spy or infiltrator, you will reveal yourself. If you are something else, perhaps you will prove useful. Either way, I will learn what you truly are." Adrian smiled slightly. "You're taking a considerable risk." "I'm already dead," the governor said simply. "In 10 years, when the lower hive falls, I will die defending this office or be executed for failure to contain the threat. Either way, my fate is sealed. But perhaps, if you are what I suspect you might be, there is a chance for something more than managed decline." "And what do you suspect I might be?" The governor's expression was unreadable. "Hope, or the final nail in humanity's coffin. Time will tell which." The archives of Hive Tertius contain 17 million documents spanning 4,000 years of recorded history. Adrian Veidt absorbed them all in 3 weeks, reading 18 hours per day, his enhanced mind processing information at speeds that would have seemed superhuman even among the augmented tech priests who maintained the data vaults. What he discovered horrified him in ways that even his own manufactured alien invasion had not. The Imperium of man was not merely authoritarian. It was not simply fascistic. It was those things elevated to religious doctrine and spread across 1,000,000 worlds. Every day, thousands of psychic humans called psychers were sacrificed to keep the Emperor alive on his golden throne. Every world tithed its population in soldiers, sending billions to die in wars across the galaxy. Entire planets were exterminated when deemed too corrupted to save, and all of this was considered not just necessary but holy. Yet what disturbed Adrian most was that the logic was sound. The archives contained clear evidence of what happened when these protocols were not followed. Worlds that tolerated alien presence were inevitably conquered or corrupted. Populations that questioned imperial doctrine fell to chaos cults within generations. Mercy was a luxury that led directly to extinction. The Imperium's cruelty was not sadistic, it was mathematical. He sat in the governor's private study on the 43rd day of his arrival, surrounded by data slates displaying population projections, resource allocation charts, and threat assessment matrices. Governor Tallis entered carrying 2 cups of recaf, the bitter stimulant drink that passed for coffee in this reality. "You have been reading for 6 weeks, the governor observed. "What conclusions have you reached?" "Your Imperium is doomed," Adrian stated without preamble. "Not eventually, within 3 to 5 centuries at current trajectory. The Emperor's psychic presence diminishes yearly. Chaos incursions increase proportionally. The Tyranid Hive fleets approach from beyond the galaxy. The Necrons awaken from their tombs. Any one of these threats might be survivable. All simultaneously are not." "This is known," Tallis replied calmly. "The Administratum's own projections confirm similar timelines. We simply do not speak of it publicly. Faith requires hope. even false hope. Adrian set down his data slate. Then why continue? If extinction is certain, why maintain the suffering? Why not seek compromise with the Tau Empire? They offer cooperation. Why not ally with the Eldar against chaos? They oppose the same enemy. The governor's expression hardened. Because humanity that survives through submission to Xenos is not humanity worth saving. We would rather die as ourselves than live as someone else's vassals or pets. That's pride, not logic. Perhaps, Talus agreed. But it is also identity. Tell me, Adrian Veidt, in your world, did you not kill millions to preserve your civilization's independence and way of life? Is this truly so different? The comparison struck like a physical blow. Adrian had indeed killed millions in New York to create a false alien threat that united humanity against a common enemy. He had considered it the only logical solution to prevent nuclear war, but here, the alien threats were real. The Imperium had already implemented his solution on a scale that made his own actions seem like a practice exercise. I need to see more, Adrian said finally. I need access to higher-level strategic data, fleet movements, inquisitorial reports, information about the alien species you fight. That information is restricted to the highest levels of Imperial authority. I cannot grant such access without drawing attention from parties you do not want noticing you. Then I'll obtain it myself, Adrian replied. Over the next month, Adrian infiltrated the Administratum, the vast bureaucratic machine that ran the Imperium's day-to-day operations. His method was simple, but required perfect execution. He forged identity documents using materials stolen from the archives. He memorized the patterns of speech and behavior that marked an Administratum official. He applied subtle cosmetic changes to his appearance, nothing that would require surgical alteration but enough to match the identity he had created. The identity was Hadrian Vex, a mid-level clerk in the Departmental Monitorum transferred from a world on the other side of the sector. The transfer paperwork was perfect because Adrian had spent 2 weeks studying authentic documents until he could replicate not just their format, but the specific quirks of different scribes' handwriting and the aging patterns of different paper stocks. He walked into the Central Administratum building on level 300 carrying a data slate containing his forged credentials. The servitor at the entrance, a lobotomized human transformed into a biological robot, scanned his documents without question. The machine part of its brain processed the paperwork as authentic. The human part was too damaged to care. Inside the Administratum was a cathedral to paperwork. Rows of desks stretched for hundreds of yards, each occupied by a clerk recording information, filing reports, processing requisitions. The ceiling rose 50 feet overhead, decorated with murals showing the Emperor in various heroic poses. Everything smelled of old paper, ink, and the chemical preservatives used to prevent documents from decaying. Adrian took his assigned desk in row 47, position 23. The previous occupant had died 3 days earlier, worked to death at age 32. No one questioned the replacement. Turnover was constant. People were resources to be consumed, not individuals to be mourned. For 2 weeks, he worked as a genuine clerk, processing supply requisitions for guard regiments fighting wars on distant worlds. He requested 5,000 boots here, 300 tons, of ammunition there, replacement parts for tanks that would arrive 6 months after those tanks were destroyed. The waste was staggering, but the scale was also revealing. He began to understand the true size of the Imperium, the distances involved, the communication delays, the sheer inertia of an empire spanning 1 million worlds. On his 15th day, he submitted a request for access to higher-level strategic documents, claiming he needed them to verify supply chain requirements for an upcoming campaign. The request was approved automatically. The approving official 3 levels above him in hierarchy never actually read his justification. The paperwork was in order, that was sufficient. The strategic documents revealed what the public archives had not. Classified threat assessments, honest population projections, internal inquisitorial memoranda discussing chaos infiltration rates, and most valuable of all, philosophical debates among high-ranking officials about the Imperium's future. A faction called the Recongregators argued for radical reform, suggesting the Imperium's rigid structure was contributing to its decline. Another group, the Thorians, sought to resurrect the Emperor in a new body. The Xanthites proposed using chaos weapons against chaos itself. Dozens of factions, each with different visions, all constrained by theological orthodoxy, that declared the current system divinely ordained. Adrian drafted his first experiment carefully, a test to see if compromise with Xenos was truly impossible or merely forbidden by dogma. The Tau Empire held 3 systems near the sector's edge. They preached a philosophy called the greater good, claiming all species could work together for mutual benefit. The Imperium considered them naive at best, insidious corruptors at worst, but Adrian had read the intelligence reports. The Tau treated human populations under their control well, better than the Imperium in many measurable ways. They were not conquerors but idealists, genuinely believing in cooperation. He forged communications from a rogue trader, one of the rare Imperial citizens granted authority to travel beyond Imperial borders. The communications suggested secret trade negotiations with Tau water-caste diplomats. The meeting location was an abandoned mining station in neutral space. The date was 3 weeks away. Adrian leaked these forged communications through carefully selected channels, making them appear to be intercepted Tau transmissions. Then he traveled to the mining station himself, using his speed and enhanced physiology to survive the journey through space in an emergency escape pod he had stolen from a cargo ship. The station was a ruin, abandoned for 2 centuries after its mineral deposits were exhausted. Adrian waited in the main docking bay, surrounded by ancient machinery and shadows. He did not have to wait long. The Tau arrived first, 3 diplomats in elegant armor accompanied by 4 warriors. They moved, cautiously, weapons ready but not raised. Adrian showed himself slowly, hands visible and empty. "I am not the rogue trader you were expecting," he said in Gothic, the common language of the Imperium. "But I am someone interested in discussing cooperation between our peoples." The lead diplomat, her face calm behind her helmet, studied him with intelligent eyes. "You are human but not Imperial. Your clothing is wrong. Your bearing is wrong. Explain yourself." "I am new to this galaxy and shocked by what I've found. Your greater good philosophy suggests there is another way beyond constant war. I want to test if that's true." For 6 hours they talked. The Tau explained their expansion philosophy. They did not seek to destroy or enslave, merely to incorporate willing members into a multi-species coalition that genuinely believed different peoples could coexist. They acknowledged humans under their rule, gave up certain freedoms, but gained security, technology, and purpose. Adrian questioned them rigorously, probing for the flaws in their philosophy. He found them surprisingly honest about their limitations. Yes, they used mind control technology on some populations. Yes, they restricted certain dangerous ideas. Yes, their system was authoritarian in its own way. But it was gentle authoritarianism, seeking the minimum control necessary for cooperation rather than maximum control for its own sake. He was considering the implications when the Grey Knights arrived. They came through the station's secondary docking bay, 8 space marines in silver armor that hummed with psychic power. Their leader, a warrior whose armor bore purity seals and sacred text, pointed an ornate sword at the gathering. "Xenos and traitors, by the authority of the Emperor's Inquisition, you are condemned. There will be no negotiation. There will be no mercy. There is only purge." The Tau warriors raised their weapons. The Grey Knights charged. What followed was slaughter. The Tau weapons, advanced plasma rifles that could punch through tank armor, barely scorched the Grey Knights' ceramite plate. The Space Marines moved with impossible speed for beings in such massive armor. Their force weapons, powered by psychic energy, cleaved through Tau armor like it was paper. Adrian watched the lead diplomat die, cut in half by a single sword stroke. He saw the Tau warriors fight bravely, hopelessly, dying to buy their diplomats time to escape. None succeeded. When the Grey Knights turned their attention to him, Adrian ran. His speed was superhuman, but so was theirs. They pursued him through the station's corridors, their heavy footfalls shaking the ancient metal. He used every advantage he possessed, his perfect understanding of physics and trajectory, his enhanced strength to tear through barriers, his ability to move in zero gravity with more grace than beings designed for it. He escaped by venting an entire section of the station to space, creating an explosive decompression that threw the Grey Knights backward. While they recovered, he reached an emergency craft and fled. But he had learned his lesson. The Imperium did not reject alien alliance through ignorance. They rejected it through hard-won experience and absolute theological conviction. Compromise with Xenos was heresy not because it was unsuccessful, but because success would mean humanity losing its distinct identity. The Tau greater good was assimilation by another name. His second experiment was more dangerous because it involved the thing he had hoped to avoid. direct contact with chaos. The archives had spoken of chaos as the ultimate enemy, entities of pure evil that corrupted everything they touched. But Adrian did not believe in pure evil. Evil was a word people used for actions they could not understand or accept. Every villain had logic, every monster had motivation. Chaos could be studied, understood, perhaps even contained through proper methodology. He traveled to a world called Mordant's Edge, where intelligence reports indicated a chaos cult had established itself in the Underhive. The journey took 3 weeks in the hold of a cargo hauler. He spent the time reading everything available about chaos, its nature, its manifestations, its patterns of corruption. Chaos fed on emotion. Khorne drew power from rage and bloodshed, Nurgle from despair and entropy, Slaanesh from excess and sensation, Tzeentch from ambition and scheming. They were not beings in the traditional sense, but concepts given terrible life by the psychic nature of reality. They could not be killed because ideas cannot die. But ideas could be contained, managed, perhaps redirected. The cult operated from an ancient temple 3 miles below the surface. Adrian approached openly, his enhanced hearing detecting their presence long before normal humans could. The cultists numbered perhaps 200, marked by mutations that betrayed their allegiance. Extra eyes, elongated limbs, skin that shifted colors and patterns that hurt to observe. Their leader was a woman who had once been beautiful. Now her left side was pristine, perfect. Her right side was rotting, diseased, infested with corruption that should have killed her but instead seemed to sustain her. She worshipped Nurgle, finding peace in accepting decay and death. "You are not one of us," she observed as Adrian entered the temple. "Yet you come alone, unafraid. Either you are foolish or you believe you can convert us." "Neither," Adrian replied. "I come seeking to understand. Your Imperium calls you evil, but I suspect you are simply people who found a different answer to suffering." The woman laughed, the sound wet and bubbling. "The Imperium offers endless work ending in meaningless death. Grandfather Nurgle offers acceptance of our mortality and peace in decay. Which sounds more evil to you?" "Neither sounds good," Adrian said honestly. "But I've read about chaos containment strategies that the Imperium refuses to attempt. Quarantine zones where cultists are isolated rather than purged. Psychological techniques to satisfy chaos urges through controlled outlets. Has anyone tried this?" "The Xanthite faction within the Inquisition experiments with such methods," the woman replied. "They are declared heretics for their efforts. The Imperium sees only 2 states, pure or purged. There is no middle ground." Adrian spent 3 days with the cult, studying their social structure, their daily activities, their methods of spreading influence. He developed a comprehensive plan for containment: psychological counseling to address the despair that made them vulnerable to Nurgle, medical treatment for their diseases, gradual reintegration into society through carefully monitored programs. He took his plan to a local administratum office, submitting it as a theoretical exercise in resource management. The proposal was rejected within hours. Not because it was logically flawed, but because it suggested chaos corruption could be reversed. That idea itself was heretical. 1 week later, the Inquisition purged the cult. Flamethrowers reduced the temple and everyone in it to ash. 3 nearby hive districts were sterilized as well, killing 17,000 civilians who may have been exposed to chaos influence. The response was not proportional. It was absolute. Adrian watched from a safe distance as the fires burned. The woman had been right. The Imperium saw only 2 states. There was no spectrum, no gradient, no possibility of redemption. Once touched by chaos, even contact with those touched by chaos, the only cure was fire. His second experiment had proven what he feared. Chaos could not be reasoned with or managed because the Imperium's absolute response was itself feeding the chaos gods. Every purge generated fear and despair that empowered the entities they fought. Every act of cruelty in chaos's name justified further cruelty in the Emperor's name. It was a cycle that fed itself, growing stronger with each iteration. Worse still, Adrian began to experience something new. Whispers at the edge of his consciousness. Thoughts that seemed to come from outside his own mind. Suggestions that felt logical, reasonable, but carried undertones he did not quite trust. Tzeentch, the chaos god of schemes and manipulation, had noticed him. The whispers praised his intelligence. They suggested improvements to his plans. They offered knowledge about the Imperium's weaknesses, about hidden truths the archives did not contain. The voice was seductive precisely because it did not seem evil. It seemed helpful. Adrian recognized mimetic warfare when he saw it. He had used similar techniques himself, planting ideas in people's minds through careful manipulation of information and emotional triggers. But recognizing the attack did not make defending against it simple. The thoughts felt like his own thoughts. The logic seemed sound. How could he be certain which ideas originated from his own, brilliant mind and which were implanted? He developed mental disciplines, meditation techniques adapted from his own world's psychology combined with what he had learned about psychic defense from imperial texts. He constructed mental barriers, categorizing thoughts by origin, analyzing each idea for subtle corruption. It was exhausting. Maintaining these defenses required constant vigilance. On his 67th day in the Imperium, as he sat in his administratum desk processing meaningless paperwork, an inquisitor arrived. Her name was Covenant. She wore armor beneath her robes, practical rather than ceremonial. Her augmented eyes whirred as they focused on him, scanning his face with technology that could detect lies, read micro-expressions, and assess threat levels in milliseconds. "Hadrian Vex," she said quietly, standing beside his desk while other clerks pretended not to notice. "Transferred from Calth. Records show you arrived 6 months after the world's entire administratum staff was killed in an orc raid. Explain how your transfer paperwork predates the event that should have made it impossible." Adrian's enhanced mind calculated options in microseconds. Running would confirm guilt. Fighting would reveal capabilities he preferred to keep hidden. Lying would fail against her augmentation. Truth, carefully selected, was his only option. "My paperwork is falsified," he admitted quietly. "I am not from Calth. I am not from any imperial world. I arrived here from somewhere else and needed identity documents to access information I required." "For what purpose?" "To understand this Imperium and determine if it can be saved from its own extinction trajectory." Covenant's expression did not change, but her hand moved fractionally closer to her bolt pistol. "You speak treason casually, as if you expect me to accept such words without executing you immediately." "If you wanted me dead, I would already be dead," Adrian replied. "You're an inquisitor. You have authority to kill on suspicion alone. Yet you're talking to me. That suggests curiosity. Perhaps I simply enjoy watching condemned men realize their fate," Covenant suggested. "Perhaps," Adrian agreed. "Or perhaps you've noticed the same patterns I have. The statistical anomalies, supply line optimizations that exceed normal efficiency, minor adjustments to resource allocation that somehow save thousands of lives without anyone noticing. You've been tracking these anomalies for weeks, trying to find their source. Now you have." Covenant pulled a data slate from her robes, displaying spreadsheets and logistics reports. "These optimizations, they're your work?" "Small changes," Adrian confirmed. "Nothing dramatic enough to draw attention, I thought. Redirecting grain shipments to prevent famines, adjusting troop deployments to minimize casualties, using administratum authority to make the system slightly less cruel, slightly more efficient. And you did this why?" "Because I could. Because it was logical. Because while I study this Imperium and search for solutions to its larger problems, I may as well reduce suffering where possible." For a long moment, Covenant studied him in silence. Other clerks continued their work, eyes down, pretending not to hear a conversation that could see them executed simply for witnessing it. Finally, she spoke. "Come with me. We need to speak somewhere more private, and you need to meet some people who will be very interested in what you have to say." Inquisitor Covenant led Adrian through corridors that descended deep into the hive's secure levels, past checkpoints guarded by soldiers whose augmented eyes tracked every movement, through doors that required both genetic verification and psychic scanning to open. They did not speak during the descent. Adrian used the time to observe his captor, noting the way she moved with absolute confidence in spaces designed to intimidate, the casual authority with which she dismissed guards who questioned her passage with a stranger. After 20 minutes of walking and descending, they entered a chamber that looked nothing like the Baroque imperial architecture Adrian had grown accustomed to. The room was functional, almost Spartan. A round table occupied the center, surrounded by 6 chairs. 3 were already occupied. The first occupant was a tech priest, his robes red as fresh blood, his face hidden behind a skull-shaped mask of polished metal. Mechadendrites, mechanical tentacles tipped with various tools, emerged from his back like metal spider legs. When he spoke, his voice came from a speaker grill, flat and emotionless. Inquisitor Covenant, you bring the anomaly. Good. My calculations suggested an 87% probability you would succeed. The second person was clearly military, though he wore no uniform. His body was covered in scars, his left arm replaced with a crude mechanical prosthetic that clicked and whirred with each movement. He studied Adrian with the eyes of someone who had seen too much death and expected to see more. This is the one who's been manipulating supply lines? He doesn't look dangerous. Appearances deceive, Covenant replied, gesturing for Adrian to sit. Hadrian Vex, though that is certainly not his real name, has infiltrated the administratum using forged credentials so perfect that our systems detected no anomalies. He has then used his position to make micro-adjustments to Imperial logistics that have, by my calculation, saved approximately 43,000 lives over the past 3 months while improving overall efficiency by 0.03%. The third occupant was a woman who radiated wealth and power. Her clothing was fine silk, worth more than most citizens earned in a lifetime. Jewels adorned her fingers and neck, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. A rogue trader, Adrian realized, one of the rare Imperial citizens granted authority to operate beyond Imperial borders. 0.03% efficiency gain, she said thoughtfully. Applied across the entire sector, that would generate surplus resources worth billions of thrones. Yet he took none of this value for himself. Because profit was not my objective, Adrian said, sitting in the indicated chair. I was conducting an experiment to see if the Imperial system could be improved from within through subtle optimization. And your conclusion? The tech priest asked. Limited success is possible but insufficient to address systemic problems. The Imperium is mathematically doomed to fail within 5 centuries at current trajectory. Small efficiencies cannot overcome fundamental structural flaws. The military man laughed, a harsh sound. 5 centuries? Try 2. I've served in the Guard for 30 years. I've watched our equipment get older, our supply lines get longer, our enemies get stronger. The decline isn't subtle anymore, it's accelerating. Covenant took her seat at the table. Introductions are necessary. The tech priest is Magos Kellen, excommunicated from Mars for pursuing innovation forbidden by the cult Mechanicus. The former guardsman is Colonel Varn, dishonorably discharged for refusing to execute his own men when ordered to purge suspected chaos corruption in his regiment. The rogue trader is Lady Tessa, whose trade routes with Xenos species have made her wealthy and heretical. And I am Inquisitor Covenant, declared excommunicate traitorous by my own order for questioning the divinity of the Emperor. Adrian's enhanced mind processed this information rapidly. You're radicals, heretics by Imperial standards, yet you meet openly, which suggests either desperation or a larger organization. Both, Lady Tessa confirmed. We represent a faction within the Imperium that believes the current path leads only to extinction. We seek alternatives, regardless of whether those alternatives align with orthodox theology. And you want to recruit me, Adrian concluded. We want to understand you first, Covenant corrected. Your capabilities are beyond normal human limits. Your intelligence exceeds anyone I've encountered. Your origin is completely unknown. You could be a Xenos infiltrator, a chaos plant, or something we have no framework to comprehend. Before recruitment, we need truth. Adrian considered how much to reveal. These people were clearly desperate, which made them dangerous. But they were also the first people he had met in this universe, who seemed to share his goal of systemic reform. I am human, but not from this reality. I come from a dimension where I was considered one of the smartest people alive. I prevented a nuclear war by killing 3 million people and staging a fake alien invasion to unite humanity against a common threat. Then I arrived here and discovered your Imperium had already perfected that strategy on a galactic scale. The silence that followed was profound. Even the tech priest's mechadendrites stopped their constant fidgeting. Colonel Varn broke the silence. You killed 3 million to save billions. That's Imperial logic. You should fit right in here. Except I'm questioning whether that logic remains valid when applied across 10,000 years, Adrian replied. My solution worked because it was singular and shocking. Your Imperium has normalized atrocity to the point where it generates the very threats it seeks to prevent. Every purge creates martyrs. Every sacrifice feeds the chaos gods. Every act of cruelty justifies further cruelty. It's a cycle that cannot be sustained. Magos Keln's mechadendrites began moving again, processing this information. Your analysis aligns with my own calculations. The Imperium's resource consumption exceeds production capacity. The gap widens annually. Mathematical certainty indicates collapse within projected timeline, yet theological constraints prevent implementing solutions that might address the problem. What solutions? Adrian asked. Alliance with Tau Empire would provide technological advancement and population stability, Keln stated. Integration with certain Eldar craft worlds would provide psychic expertise to combat chaos more effectively. Negotiation with Orc warlords could redirect their aggression toward mutual enemies. Research into controlled chaos manifestation could yield weapons effective against chaos itself, all forbidden by current Imperial doctrine. I tested some of those solutions, Adrian said quietly. The results were educational. I attempted to facilitate dialogue with Tau diplomats. Grey Knights purged everyone involved. I studied a Nurgle cult to develop containment strategies. The Inquisition burned 3 hive districts rather than risk contamination. Because the Imperium operates on absolutes, Lady Tessa said. Pure or impure, loyal or heretical, human or Xenos. There is no middle ground because they believe middle ground leads to corruption and extinction. And they may be correct, Adrian admitted. That's what disturbs me most. I've spent 3 months analyzing Imperial history, studying every instance of compromise or mercy. The pattern is consistent. Every time the Imperium showed flexibility, it led to disaster. Worlds that tolerated Xenos' presence were eventually conquered. Populations that questioned Imperial doctrine fell to chaos cults. The cruelty isn't sadistic. It's the result of 10,000 years of trial and error that consistently demonstrated that anything less than absolute rigidity leads to destruction. Covenant leaned forward. Yet you still believe change is possible. Otherwise you would have fled rather than continuing your experiments. I believe change is necessary, Adrian corrected. Whether it's possible remains to be determined. But I've developed a plan. A comprehensive restructuring that addresses the Imperium's fundamental problems while maintaining humanity's distinct identity and resistance to chaos corruption. He stood and moved to a blank section of wall. From memory, he began to draw, his hand moving with perfect precision to create diagrams and flowcharts. The Imperium's core problem is centralization around a single failing point, the Emperor on the Golden Throne. His psychic presence maintains the Astronomicon, enables warp travel, and provides the theological foundation for Imperial unity. When he fails, everything collapses. This is known, Keln stated. But the solution is not to prevent his failure, which is impossible, but to distribute his functions before failure occurs. The Astronomicon can be replaced with a network of lesser psychic beacons, each maintained by a choir of psychers. Less efficient but more resilient. Warp travel would become more dangerous but possible. The theological vacuum can be filled by transitioning worship to distributed targets. The returned Primarchs, living saints, the idea of the Emperor rather than the man himself. Colonel Varn frowned. You're describing controlled heresy, the decline of the Emperor's worship into fragmented cults. I'm describing survival, Adrian replied. The current system requires the Emperor to live forever, which is impossible. My system anticipates his death and transforms it from civilization-ending catastrophe into manageable crisis. And the Xenos threats? Lady Tessa asked. Your plan does nothing to address Tyranids, Orcs, Chaos, or the dozen other species seeking humanity's extinction. That's Phase 2. Adrian drew new diagrams. Selective alliance with compatible Xenos species against existential threats. Not integration or submission, but temporary cooperation against common enemies. The Tau philosophy of greater good is dangerous because it demands ideological conversion. But military alliance for specific objectives leaves human identity intact. The Eldar hate chaos as much as humanity does. Mutual defense pacts serve both species. Impossible, Covenant said flatly. Imperial doctrine forbids it absolutely. The penalty for Xenos cooperation is death, not just for the individual but often for their entire world. Which is why Phase 3 involves the most dangerous element, controlled reformation of Imperial theology. Adrian's hand moved faster, creating complex relationship maps. The Imperium's faith is simultaneously its greatest strength and fatal weakness. Faith provides unity and resistance to chaos corruption, but it also prevents necessary adaptation. The solution is to gradually introduce theological flexibility through careful manipulation of the ecclesiarchy. He turned to face them. I would need to infiltrate the highest levels of Imperial authority, not through force but through bureaucratic manipulation and the careful placement of allies in key positions. Over decades, we introduced subtle doctrinal changes, reinterpretations of ancient texts that allow for Xenos cooperation in specific circumstances, new saint cults that emphasize pragmatism over rigid orthodoxy, gradual shifts that transform the Imperium from within while maintaining the appearance of continuity. The room was silent except for the humming of machinery and the distant sounds of the hive city beyond the walls. Finally, Magos Keln spoke. The plan demonstrates sophisticated understanding of complex systems. Probability of success over 50-year time frame, approximately 12%. Probability of detection and execution before completion, 73%. Probability of unintended consequences, exceeding benefits, 61%. Those are terrible odds, Colonel Varn observed. They're better than the certainty of extinction through inaction, Adrian countered. Covenant stood and walked to the wall where Adrian had drawn his plans. She studied them in silence for a long moment. You understand what you're proposing? You're suggesting we manipulate the faith of trillions, ally with Xenos that have killed billions of humans, and undermine the theological foundation that has sustained the Imperium for 10 millennia. If we fail, we damn not just ourselves, but potentially all of humanity. If we do nothing, humanity is damned anyway, Adrian replied, just more slowly. And you believe you're qualified to orchestrate something this ambitious? In my world, I united nations through strategic manipulation and controlled information. I prevented nuclear war through careful application of game theory and psychological understanding. I am, quite literally, the smartest man from my universe. Whether that makes me qualified for this task, I don't know. But I'm the best option available. Lady Tessa laughed, the sound unexpected in the tense atmosphere. The ego on this one. I like him. Ego requires self-deception, Adrian said calmly. I'm simply stating measurable facts. My intelligence exceeds normal human limits. My strategic thinking has proven effective across multiple scenarios. My moral flexibility allows me to accept necessary evils that others would reject on principle. These are advantages, not boasts. And your weaknesses? Covenant pressed. Adrian paused, genuinely considering the question. I'm vulnerable to chaos corruption, as recent whispers in my mind have proven. My understanding of warp mechanics remains incomplete. My plans require cooperation from others, which introduces unpredictability. And most significantly, I may be fundamentally wrong. The Imperium's current system may actually be the optimal solution, and my attempts at reform may cause more harm than good. At least you're honest about uncertainty, Colonel Varn said. I've known too many brilliant men who were absolutely certain right up until their plans collapsed. Covenant returned to her seat. Before we discuss implementation, you need to understand what you're asking us to risk. Magos Keln was tortured for 17 years by the Mechanicus Inquisition before escaping. Colonel Varn watched his entire regiment executed for refusing unlawful orders. Lady Tessa has survived 14 assassination attempts from rivals and Imperial authorities. I have been hunted by my own order for 8 years, moving from shadow to shadow, never safe. We have all sacrificed everything for the possibility of change. What are you willing to sacrifice? Everything? Adrian replied without hesitation. In my world, I gave up any possibility of normal relationships, of peace, of moral certainty. I became a monster who killed millions. If I must make similar sacrifices, here to prevent humanity's extinction, I will do so. But I prefer solutions that minimize suffering while maximizing effectiveness. Noble sentiment, Covenant said. Let's see how long it survives contact with reality. We'll help you implement your plan, but with conditions. First, you accept that we may terminate this project if we determine the risks exceed benefits. Second, you submit to regular psychic screening to ensure chaos corruption hasn't compromised your judgment. Third, you acknowledge that if this fails, we're all dead and likely damned. Acceptable, Adrian agreed. Over the next 3 weeks, they planned. Magos Keln provided technological resources and information about Mechanicus politics. Colonel Varn offered intelligence on military deployments and guard logistics. Lady Tessa contributed wealth and connections to underworld networks that moved goods and people beyond Imperial oversight. Covenant coordinated everything, using her inquisitorial training to identify vulnerabilities in Imperial security. They recruited carefully, bringing in a junior administratum official who had witnessed his family killed in an unnecessary purge. A sister of battle who questioned her order's casual cruelty. A navigator whose family had been executed for chart errors that were actually caused by warp storms beyond their control. Each recruit added capabilities and knowledge, but also increased their vulnerability to discovery. On the 43rd day of planning, as Adrian worked in his administratum desk processing the usual meaningless paperwork while simultaneously coordinating their conspiracy through coded messages, alarms sounded throughout the hive. The Vox speakers crackled to life, broadcasting in the flat monotone of automated emergency systems. All citizens remain in current locations. Security lockdown in effect. Compliance is mandatory. Resistance will be met with lethal force. Adrian's enhanced hearing detected the sound of marching boots, thousands of them moving through the hive levels with military precision. Through the administratum building's windows, he saw aircraft descending, each carrying the symbol of the Inquisition. His data slate chimed with an emergency message from Covenant. Compromised. Meeting location burned. Multiple agents dead. High Lords alerted. Flee immediately. But before Adrian could move, the administratum building's main doors crashed open. Inquisitors poured in, accompanied by Arbites enforcers in full combat armor and a full squad of Space Marines in the dark colors of an unknown chapter. The lead Inquisitor, an elderly man whose augmented eyes glowed with power, raised a hand for silence. When he spoke, his voice carried throughout the massive chamber through Vox amplification. Citizens of the Administratum, you have been harboring a traitor in your midst, one who has manipulated Imperial logistics, forged documents, and conspired with known heretics to undermine the God Emperor's domain. This traitor will be identified and punished. Anyone who aided him, knowingly or unknowingly, will face investigation. The Emperor protects, but only the faithful. Adrian remained seated at his desk, knowing that running would only confirm guilt. His mind calculated options rapidly. Fighting was possible, but would reveal capabilities he had kept hidden and would result in massive civilian casualties. Surrender meant interrogation, torture, and eventual execution. Escape seemed impossible, with Space Marines blocking every exit. The elderly Inquisitor approached his desk, moving through the rows with the confidence of absolute authority. He stopped directly in front of Adrian's position. Hadrian Vex, or should I say Adrian Veit, we have been watching you longer than you realize. Your experiments with Tau diplomacy and chaos containment were monitored from their inception. Your conspiracy with Inquisitor Covenant and her allies was infiltrated before you ever met them. Everything you have done, every plan you have made, every heretical thought you have entertained has been recorded and judged. Adrian kept his expression neutral despite the shock of realization. They had known from the beginning. Everything had been observed. Either his infiltration had never been as subtle as he believed, or Imperial counterintelligence exceeded even his considerable estimates. And now, the Inquisitor continued, you will come with us to Terra. The High Lords wish to speak with you personally. And perhaps, if the Emperor wills it, you will have opportunity to present your plans directly to those with authority to implement them, or reject them. That decision is not mine to make. 2 Space Marines moved forward, their massive armored forms dwarfing Adrian's seated figure. He did not resist as they placed restraints on his wrists, heavy manacles that could hold even superhuman strength. As they led him from the Administratum building, he caught glimpses of his co-conspirators also being arrested throughout the hive. Covenant fought briefly, killing 3 Arbites before being subdued by a psychic attack that left her unconscious. Colonel Varn detonated a grenade rather than be taken alive. Lady Tessa surrendered immediately, already calculating her defense. Magos Keln's fate was unclear. As Adrian was loaded into a transport ship bound for Terra, he experienced something unfamiliar. Genuine uncertainty about whether he had won or lost. The High Lords knew everything, yet they were bringing him to Terra rather than executing him. They had called his plans heretical, yet they wanted him to present those plans directly. Either this was elaborate theater before his execution, or something far more complex was occurring. The Imperium, he was learning, never operated on simple logic. The journey to Terra took 37 days through the warp, during which Adrian was held in a cell barely large enough to stand. His restraints prevented movement beyond sitting or lying down. Food came twice daily through a slot in the door, nutrient paste that tasted of nothing but provided adequate sustenance. He was not tortured, not interrogated, simply isolated with his thoughts and the constant whispers of Tzeentch that had grown stronger since his arrest. The whispers praised his intelligence, commiserated about his imprisonment, suggested escape plans that sounded logical until he analyzed them deeply and found the flaws. The Chaos God was patient, creative, adapting to each defense Adrian erected. Sometimes the voice pretended to be his own thoughts. Sometimes it claimed to be a fragment of his subconscious trying to help. The psychological warfare was sophisticated beyond anything he had encountered. He maintained sanity through rigid mental discipline, categorizing each thought, analyzing its origin, constructing internal barriers between sections of his consciousness. But the effort was exhausting. By the time the ship entered the Sol system, Adrian had slept perhaps 40 hours total across the entire journey. When the cell door finally opened, he was escorted by 6 Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guards in their golden armor that seemed to glow with internal light. They did not speak, did not acknowledge his questions, simply formed a protective formation around him as they moved through the ship toward the landing craft. Through viewing ports, Adrian caught his first glimpse of Terra. The birthplace of humanity was a fortress world beyond comprehension. Orbital platforms the size of cities bristled with weapons. Defense satellites numbered in the hundreds of thousands. The planet itself was entirely covered in structures, no natural surface visible anywhere. And at the center of the largest continent, rising miles into the atmosphere, stood the Imperial Palace. The scale defied description. Adrian had studied the specifications in archives, but reading numbers and witnessing reality were different experiences. The palace covered an area larger than many countries on his Earth. Its walls were hundreds of feet thick, built from materials that could withstand orbital bombardment. Weapon batteries that could destroy capital ships studded every surface. And somewhere within that impossible fortress, at its very heart, sat the Emperor on his golden throne. The landing craft descended through layers of security, each more stringent than the last. Genetic scanners verified identities. Psychic probes assessed for corruption. Servo skulls, floating robotic skulls with sensors swarmed around the craft like mechanical insects. At each checkpoint, permissions were verified against records that stretched back 10,000 years. Finally, they landed in a bay deep within the palace structure. The custodes escorted Adrian through corridors of such magnificent grandeur that even his disciplined mind struggled to process it all. Statues of heroes hundreds of feet tall, cathedrals where thousands of pilgrims prostrated themselves before holy relics. Gardens maintained by armies of servants where every plant was genetically engineered for perfection. The wealth on display exceeded that of entire planets in his universe. After walking for what felt like hours, they entered a chamber that Adrian recognized from descriptions, the Senatorum Imperialis, where the High Lords of Terra conducted the business of ruling 1,000,000 worlds. The chamber was circular, rising in tiers like an ancient amphitheater. 12 thrones occupied the highest tier, each representing one of the High Lords who collectively governed the Imperium in the Emperor's name. All 12 were occupied. Adrian was led to the center of the chamber floor, a small circular platform surrounded by empty space. The custodes took positions around the perimeter, silent golden sentinels. The High Lord seated on the central throne spoke first. He was ancient, his body more machine than flesh, kept alive through technology that should have been impossible. His voice came from speakers, flat and emotionless. Adrian Veit, anomaly from beyond our reality, you stand before the highest authority in the Imperium of man, exceeded only by the God Emperor himself. You have been charged with infiltration, forgery, conspiracy with known heretics, and attempting to undermine the theological foundations of our civilization. How do you answer these charges? Adrian's voice was steady despite his exhaustion. I acknowledge all actions described. I do not dispute the facts. I dispute only the characterization of those actions as crimes rather than necessary attempts to prevent humanity's extinction. A different High Lord spoke, this one a woman whose face was hidden behind a mask of polished silver. You believe yourself qualified to judge the Imperium's policies? You, who have existed in our reality for mere months, presume to understand better than 10,000 years of accumulated wisdom. I believe objectivity provides advantage that institutional thinking cannot achieve, Adrian replied. You are trapped within a system that punishes questioning and rewards orthodoxy. This creates blind spots where potential solutions remain unexplored because exploring them is heretical. I have no such constraints. I can analyze your civilization dispassionately and identify problems you cannot acknowledge. And you determined we are doomed, a third High Lord stated, his voice carrying skepticism. You calculated our extinction within 5 centuries, An impressive prophecy. But you are not the first to predict the Imperium's fall. Such predictions have been made continuously for 10 millennia. We persist despite them. Persistence is not victory, Adrian countered. Every year you control fewer worlds than the year before. Every decade the Emperor's presence weakens further. Every century brings new threats while old ones remain undefeated. Persistence through managed decline is simply slow extinction with extra steps. The chamber fell silent. The High Lords exchanged glances, though their augmented eyes made reading expressions impossible. Finally, the Central High Lord spoke again. You are correct. Everything you have described is accurate. We are aware of our trajectory. We know the probable end. We simply choose to face it with dignity rather than compromise our humanity through alliance with that which should be destroyed. Adrian felt genuine confusion for the first time in months. You know? You've always known? Then why bring me here? Why not simply execute me and be done with it? Because the Emperor wishes to speak with you, a new voice said. Adrian turned to see a figure entering the chamber from a concealed doorway. The man wore simple robes of white and gold, his face kind but bearing the weariness of impossible age. Power radiated from him, not the mechanical power of technology, but something fundamental, like standing near a star. I am Malkador, or more precisely, a psychic echo of what Malkador once was, sustained by the Emperor's power to serve as his voice when direct communication is impossible or unwise. The High Lords bowed their heads in respect. Even the custodes shifted their stance subtly, acknowledging a presence that exceeded all but the Emperor himself. Malkador approached Adrian, studying him with eyes that seemed to see through flesh to the soul beneath. You are an interesting case, Adrian Veidt, a man of perfect logic who killed millions for the greater good. A brilliant mind that believes any problem can be solved through sufficient intelligence and planning. You are, in many ways, what the Emperor himself once was before 10,000 years of suffering taught him the limits of such thinking. You're saying my approach is flawed, Adrian stated. I'm saying your approach is incomplete, Malkador corrected. You have identified the Imperium's problems accurately. Your proposed solutions demonstrate sophisticated understanding of complex systems. But you have failed to account for the single most important variable, human nature itself. Malkador gestured, and the chamber's walls seemed to dissolve, replaced by visions that Adrian knew were psychically projected directly into his mind. He saw the Horus Heresy, the civil war that had nearly destroyed the Imperium 10,000 years earlier. He witnessed the Emperor's brightest and most beloved son turn traitor, corrupted by chaos despite having been designed to resist such influence. He watched as half the Space Marine legions, humanity's greatest defenders, became its worst enemies. The Emperor created the Primarchs as perfect beings, Malkador explained. Each was designed to excel in specific domains. Brilliant minds, superhuman bodies, incorruptible loyalty. Or so he believed. But perfection is a target that chaos excels at corrupting. The brightest fell furthest. The most confident became the most arrogant. The most devoted to order became slaves to ritual. Every strength became a weakness when chaos found the right pressure point. The visions shifted. Adrian saw the age of apostasy when the Imperium nearly collapsed into religious civil war. He witnessed the reign of blood, where billions died in the name of the Emperor while the Emperor's own will was ignored. He observed countless smaller incidents where reform was attempted and failed catastrophically. Every solution you propose has been attempted, Malkador continued. Alliance with Xenos was tried during the Great Crusade. It ended in betrayal every time. Theological flexibility was explored during the age of apostasy. It led to madness and civil war. Distributed psychic beacons were tested as astronomical backups. They became conduits for demonic invasion. Every logical solution has been empirically proven to fail. Adrian felt his certainty crumbling. Then what is the answer? Accept extinction? Surrender to inevitability? Perhaps, Malkador said quietly. Or perhaps the answer is that some problems have no solution, only dignified responses to impossible situations. The Emperor chose his response 10,000 years ago when he sat upon the Golden Throne. He accepted eternal suffering to buy humanity time. Not salvation, merely time. Each day he continues as a victory, even if that day brings us closer to eventual defeat. That's insane, Adrian protested. Suffering without purpose. Sacrifice without hope of success. That's meaningless martyrdom. Is it? Malkador asked. You killed 3 million to save billions. Was their suffering meaningless? Or did it serve a purpose even as it broke moral laws you claimed to value? The Emperor kills thousands daily to maintain the Astronomicon. Is that different in kind or merely in scale? Adrian had no answer. The comparison was too precise, too accurate. He had justified his own atrocity through utilitarian calculus. The Imperium did the same thing but sustained across 10 millennia instead of a single act. The visions shifted again. This time, Adrian saw his own plan implemented. He watched as his Xenos alliances succeeded initially, defeating Chaos forces through combined tactics. But slowly, gradually, human culture began to change. The Tau's greater good philosophy spread like a virus, converting humans to alien ideology. Eldar influence grew stronger, shaping human psychic development in ways that benefited Eldar interests. Within 3 generations, humanity as a distinct species still existed, but humanity as a distinct culture had been absorbed into something else. This is speculation, Adrian objected. A possible future, not certain outcome. It is the Emperor's vision, Malkador replied, drawn from his 10,000 years of witnessing every permutation of human choice. He has seen this pattern repeat across countless realities, dimensions, and possibilities. The outcome varies in details, but the pattern holds. Humanity that compromises its identity for survival eventually loses both. Show me his vision of the Imperium's future without my intervention, Adrian demanded. The scene changed. He saw Terra in flames as Chaos fleets broke through the Cadian Gate and pushed toward the Sol system. He witnessed the Emperor's final death, the Golden Throne failing at last, the Astronomicon going dark. He watched humanity's fragmented remnants fight on without central authority, some worlds holding out for centuries, others falling within days. But even in extinction, they remained human. They died as themselves rather than survived as something else. He offers you a choice, Malkador said. Not 3 options as you might prefer, but 2 because the middle ground you seek does not exist in this reality. The visions coalesced into 2 clear paths. In the first, Adrian was executed and his conspiracy dismantled. The Imperium continued its slow decline exactly as projected, buying humanity perhaps 5 more centuries before final collapse. In the second, Adrian's plans were implemented with the full backing of Imperial authority. Humanity survived longer, possibly indefinitely, but transformed gradually into something unrecognizable. Its distinct identity dissolved into alien cultural matrices. Both futures are terrible, Adrian said quietly. Yes, Malkador agreed. That is the nature of this universe. There are no good options, only choices about which terrible outcome you find more tolerable. The Emperor chose preservation of human identity over preservation of human life. He believes souls matter more than bodies, culture more than survival. Do you agree? Adrian's mind raced through calculations, seeking a third option, a synthesis that preserved both survival and identity. But every path led to the same conclusion. The universe itself seemed designed to punish compromise. Chaos corrupted gradual change. Xenos absorbed those who cooperated too closely. The Tyranids consumed everything biological. The Necrons sought to exterminate all life. There was no safe middle ground because the fundamental nature of reality in this universe was absolute conflict. I don't accept this, Adrian stated. I refuse to believe the only choices are extinction or assimilation. There must be something I'm missing, some variable I haven't accounted for. You are missing nothing, Malkador said gently. You simply cannot accept that your intelligence, vast as it is, cannot solve every problem. Some situations have no solution. Some sacrifices purchase nothing but time. Some martyrdom is meaningless except in the refusal to surrender. This is the lesson the Emperor learned across 40,000 years of human history. This is what 10,000 years of suffering on the Golden Throne has taught him. And this is what you must now decide. Will you accept this truth, or will you continue believing that sufficient cleverness can overcome any obstacle? The visions faded. The chamber returned to normal. The High Lords watched in silence. The custodes remained motionless. Adrian stood alone on the platform, feeling more isolated than at any point since his arrival in this universe. What does the Emperor want from me? He asked finally. He wants you to choose, Malkador replied. Not between his 2 paths, but whether to accept that those are the only paths. If you accept the fundamental truth of this reality, that survival and identity cannot both be preserved, Then you may serve the Imperium by working within its constraints rather than attempting to reform them. You would join the Inquisition as a sanctioned radical, using your considerable intellect to optimize Imperial operations within theological boundaries. You would save billions through careful application of superior logistics and strategic thinking. But you would never save humanity itself because humanity is already dying and cannot be saved. And if I don't accept this? Then you will be returned to your own reality, Malcador said. The Emperor has the power to reverse the phenomenon that brought you here. You would wake in your own world, your memories of this place fading like a dream. You would continue your existence as before, forever uncertain if this experience was real or imaginary. Adrian looked around the chamber at the assembled High Lords, at the golden custodes, at Malcador's ancient face. He thought about Governor Tallis and his pragmatic acceptance of doom, about Inquisitor Covenant and her desperate hope for change despite knowing the odds, about the billions of humans suffering daily to maintain a system that would inevitably fail. If I accept your offer and join the Inquisition, Adrian said slowly, I would be committing myself to a philosophy I fundamentally disagree with. I would be accepting that intelligence has limits, that some problems cannot be solved, that sometimes dignified defeat is the only victory available. Everything I've built my identity around would be proven insufficient. Yes, Malcador confirmed, but if I return to my own reality, I leave these people to their fate. Billions who could be saved through better logistics, better strategy, better application of resources. I would be choosing my own philosophical comfort over their tangible suffering. Also, yes, Malcador agreed. Adrian closed his eyes, thinking through the implications. In his world, he had sacrificed his own moral purity to save civilization. He had accepted being called a monster if it meant preventing nuclear war. He had chosen pragmatic evil over principled inaction. The choice before him now was similar but inverted. Instead of violating his principles through action, he was being asked to violate them through acceptance of limits to action. When he opened his eyes, his decision was made. I'll stay, not because I accept your philosophy completely, but because refusing would mean abandoning people I could help. I'll work within your constraints while continuing to search for alternatives you've overlooked. Perhaps I'll never find them. Perhaps you're right that no such alternatives exist, but I have to try. Malcador nodded slowly, something like approval in his ancient eyes. The Emperor expected this choice. You are not someone who surrenders easily, even to reality itself. Very well. You will be inducted into the Inquisition under Ordo Machinum, serving as a specialist in logistics and strategic optimization. Your official title will be Interrogator, though your actual authority will exceed that rank. You will report to Inquisitor Covenant, who has agreed to supervise your activities provided you submit to regular screening for chaos corruption. Covenant survived? Adrian felt unexpected relief. The Emperor intervened personally to preserve her life and several of your co-conspirators. He believes your conspiracy, while heretical, was undertaken with genuine intent to serve humanity. That intent has value even when the methods were flawed. Besides, you will need allies if you are to accomplish anything meaningful within the Inquisition's political landscape. The High Lords began to file from the chamber, their business concluded. Only Malcador and the custodes remained. The psychic echo approached Adrian one final time, placing a hand on his shoulder with surprising gentleness. You will save billions through your service, Malcador said quietly. Your intelligence will optimize Imperial operations in ways that will be studied for generations. But you will also watch the Imperium continue its decline despite your efforts. You will see your best plans fail for reasons beyond your control. You will experience the deep frustration of knowing you could solve problems if only the constraints were different. This is the burden you have chosen. I've carried burdens before, Adrian replied. Not like this one, Malcador said. In your world, your burden ended when your plan succeeded. Here, the burden continues forever or until you break. Most who carry such weight eventually do break. The Emperor himself is broken in all ways but the most essential. Perhaps you will prove more resilient, perhaps not. Either way, humanity will benefit from your service for whatever time you can sustain it. Malcador began to fade, his psychic presence withdrawing back to whatever source sustained it. His final words echoed in the chamber as his form became transparent. Welcome to the Imperium of Man, Adrian Veidt. May you find whatever peace is available to those who see too clearly and care too much in a universe that punishes both sight and caring. Then he was gone, and Adrian stood alone with the custodes in the empty chamber. One of the Golden Warriors approached, his first acknowledgement that Adrian existed. "Come, we will escort you to your new quarters and begin your induction into the Inquisition. Your service begins immediately. The Emperor watches, the Emperor protects, the Emperor judges." As Adrian followed the custodes from the chamber, he felt the weight of his choice settling onto his shoulders. He had saved his world once through a single perfect atrocity. Here he would attempt to save humanity through infinite imperfect compromises, knowing that salvation itself was impossible and accepting that the best outcome available was simply extending the time until inevitable doom. In his private chambers 3 hours later, after the initial induction ceremonies and oaths of service, Adrian began a journal. The first entry was brief. "Day 1 of service to the Imperium. I came here believing I could solve any problem through sufficient intelligence. Today I learned that the smartest thing I can do is accept that some problems have no solutions. I will serve anyway. I will optimize what can be optimized, save who can be saved, and buy humanity whatever time my abilities can purchase. It is not the victory I wanted, but perhaps it is the victory this universe allows." The Emperor knew this truth for 10,000 years. Now I begin to understand why he chose the Golden Throne over alternatives that might have saved his life but doomed humanity's soul. He closed the journal and looked out the window at Terra's endless cityscape. Somewhere in this fortress world, the Emperor sat on his golden throne, suffering eternally to maintain humanity's fragile hold on existence. And now, Adrian Veidt, the smartest man from his universe, had joined that suffering, accepting a burden that had no end and offered no ultimate victory. Only time. Only persistence. Only the grim satisfaction of making an impossible situation slightly less terrible through the application of superior intelligence to problems that could be managed but never solved. In the grim darkness of the far future, there was only war. And now there was also Adrian Veidt, forever optimizing humanity's defeat into something that might resemble survival, one calculated compromise at a time.